Good morning and good afternoon to some. Thank you so much for attending today's webinar, From Calm to Crisis, Multifamily Game Plan for Surviving and Thriving Through Catastrophes. My name is Sam Schabowski, and I'm a part of the marketing team here. And presenting today is Meagan Benton, firm's national sales manager, who has over a decade of experience in the multifamily industry, along with Trent Bohrmann, the firm director, who has managed over 50 million in restoration project costs and over 5,000 property damage claims in just the last 4 years. Trent is also WRT and AMRT certified. Now, before I hand it off to Meagan and Trent, just a couple housekeeping things. First and foremost, as you enter today, you will listen only mode on our GoToWebinar software. If you do have any questions or comments throughout the presentation, feel free to click the little question mark chat box up in the top right, and there you can put those questions in, and our team will do our best to put them together and ask them during our Q&A session at the end of the presentation. Also, probably tomorrow or the following day, you will receive a follow-up email with the recording link to our YouTube channel, as well as the slides and the contact information for Meagan and Trent if you have any other questions or concerns you would like to bring to us at a later date. And with that, Trent and Meagan, take it away.
Thanks so much, Sam. I appreciate it. And thank you, everyone, for joining us today. So I wanted to get started with a few questions. Have you ever had a property go offline for a few days, maybe even a few weeks after like a major storm or a major incident? Have you watched the remediation bills pile up on those while residents complain and revenue tanks? Have you ever submitted an insurance claim only to get pennies on the dollar or worse, get denied altogether? Most of us in this industry have experienced that at least once. I've definitely been there with my background. It's frustrating, it's expensive, and it is at least in part avoidable. And what we've learned here at Firm over years of managing some of the worst scenarios in multifamily and hospitality is this: the teams that are prepared in advance are the ones who recover faster with less damage and fewer financial surprises. And the ones that don't, they're usually still picking up the pieces months later. Today's presentation is about giving you tools, real tactical steps that you can, with your executive teams and property teams, that you can use to turn chaos hopefully into clarity whenever a disaster strikes. Because the question isn't, of course, if, it is when you will have a disaster on site, and how your teams are going to be prepared when that moment comes and the clock starts ticking is crucial rather. This is a guide to our process here at Firm and how we ensure calm recovery for our clients in order to hopefully provide you and your teams with some solid trainings on how you can potentially mimic some of that process. I will be sure to add to stay to the very end. There is a site team checklist download that you can send out to your site teams for reference that you'll get at the end. And that'll be just a really good solid checklist for your teams to make sure that they're doing everything that we can to do in advance to prepare for any sort of big disaster. So we've introduced ourselves. I wanted to take a quick moment to introduce Firm, who we are, why we have the authority to discuss these topics. Firm is an incident and vendor management service for emergency and unexpected incidents. Our experts in the restoration industry oversee our clients' portfolios and oversee incidents like water intrusion, mold remediation, fire and smoke restoration, biohazard and illicit drug cleanup, hazardous material abatement, etc. So basically, as soon as an incident occurs, our clients call us and we dispatch the vendor, we manage the entire project, and we audit the invoices at the end. We have a robust network of vendors all across the country that are well trained with our best practices and that we negotiate set prices and priorities for with our clients. So our teams manage incidents like this every day. That's on a professional scale. It's what we do all day, every day. So, like I said, the process we're talking you through today is what we guide and manage for our clients on a daily basis. And we also tend to lower our clients' restoration bills by up to 30%. So you can check out our YouTube channel for our former webinars if auditing invoices and lowering restoration costs is something that interests you. It usually does. And from there, I will dive in. So, pre-disaster agreements. Before disaster strikes, it's vital to have agreements in place, not just with contractors and restoration vendors, but also some sort of arrangement with your local first responders. These relationships are going to help secure faster access, coordinate safety efforts, and have more of a more effective overall site response. One of the things we like to say here is get to know us before you need us. And the same is true with these ERVs and first responders. So coordinating with the first responders is what I'll cover first. Have your properties identify exactly which responders will be in their area and who's going to be responding. Once they've identified them, they should invite them out to the property, walk them through access points, utility shutoffs, staging areas, etc. The goal is to make sure that they're not seeing your site for the first time during a crisis. I've definitely had that happen before, and we've had clients that have had that happen, and it's not fun. Make sure your responders have everything they need to get in quickly, access codes, building maps, emergency contacts, have them test their SOS systems to ensure that the gates are opening properly, but also, of course, provide them with access codes just in case. The team should ask them what they need from the staff in an actual event. Where should they stage? Who should meet them, etc. That process should be done on an annual basis. This is a point that I really like to hammer in. With all of the turnover in our industry, it is very possible to have a new property manager within a few months of updating your access protocols. And so making sure that you're just staying on top of that is really important so that these things are getting up. I'm sorry, contracts and restoration uh, agreements, rather. If you have seen our previous webinars, we harp a lot on getting contracts with vendors set up in advance for preferred response times. At Firm, we negotiate a preferential response time during big disasters and like a storm, and also a 2-hour response time to all incidents in general. And this is kind of tricky. What we've seen before when we onboard new clients or when I'm talking to potential clients is that they've maybe been promised preferential reaction and treatment in the past, but aren't actually given it during specifically a natural disaster when there's a lot of different properties in the same area that are getting hit. The way that we've curated and trained our vendors, we can actually guarantee it, but hopefully having at least something in place, some sort of agreement in place in advance, it will always help to have something set down in stone for between you and your ERV. So getting into my bullet points here, make sure you're asking them for their guaranteed response times. How soon can they be on site after you call? Make sure vendors know how to access each site. Again, provide gate codes, key access locations, any protocols that you have ahead of time so they're not stuck waiting while the damage gets worse. Establish a clear contact chain. Who makes the initial call, who approves the scope, who gets the updates. Everyone should be in the know of where they are on that chain of command before the event actually takes place. Set expectations on where they'll stage equipment, how often they'll update you, what kind of communication cadence works for your team. If you can, negotiate rates in advance. Catastrophes, the big ones, especially, like I said, natural disasters, when a lot of people need help, those are going to drive up costs significantly. So having established pricing ahead of time helps you avoid that surprise. We always negotiate preferred pricing for our clients. If you can, you should try to do that too. And again, you can check out our YouTube channel for our previous webinar on if you want our tips on negotiation techniques. We've noticed that our vendors, because they enjoy being part of our network, because of our consistent process, they also have, of course, dependable revenue throughout the year. They're more comfortable for foregoing that surge pricing entirely during a natural disaster. And look, I do understand that that is in large part because of our network in terms of our clients and our vendors, and we might have a bit more leverage to negotiate some of these things for than everybody on the call. But trust me, any prearranged pricing or priority is definitely going to help. And this is all going to turn chaotic emergency into a coordinated effort. Anything that you want to add on that, Trent, in terms of negotiating contracts?
Yeah, thanks, Megan. Very well said, and a couple big, key points there. Like, get to know us before you need us. That is so important for anyone who might be involved with your property during a catastrophe. We know every single second counts. There's going to be so much chaos, and especially in those moments, wanting to make sure everyone's as efficient as possible. I actually want to tell a quick little story here. We actually had a fire response where a dryer on site. It was a facility that had washing machines and dryers actually caught fire. It was not a big response by any means. It was, a few $1,000s, some smoke, cleanup. But the problem was when the fire department showed up, there was an issue with the master key. And actually, as part of that response, the fire department forced entry into 24 units. The actual repair bill for those doors was close to $100,000. So just something as simple as, where do you keep your keys and access for after hours or emergencies, could have prevented a situation like that where an unintended, side effect was $100,000 worth of door damages. And again, there's no arguing with the fire department. They're out there to try to save, human lives and make sure everyone's safe. So just an unfortunate situation that we recently saw that could have been prevented with, getting folks on site before an emergency happens, and especially too, just communicating expectations. One last point here before we go on to the next slide, but like Megan said too, the time to be asking about rates and price is not at 2 a.m. or not when all hands are on deck following a catastrophe. Whether that's a storm, Austin, Texas just had a microburst last week that went through. Everyone is looking for the same resources. So it just gets so much more tricky. There's surcharges. So like Megan said, if you can get in front of it and have a good agreement with prioritization in place, you're going to set yourself up for much better success. So, thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, a lot of these things, it feels like, of course, that's, something that that feels like common sense, but at the same time, they get missed all the time at the property level. Having had worked on the property level, this is no offense to property managers. I've been a property manager, and it's just you're incredibly busy, and it is up to our higher level teams to make sure that we're staying on top of making sure these things are getting done, like I said, on a regular basis. So yeah, to prevent stuff like what Trent's talking about. One other thing here I will say, in terms of central protocol access points, like I said, at firm, we like to have very clear outline and process for our vendors to follow, which of course is going to sometimes vary by portfolio, by state, sometimes by each individual property. For our clients, we are the ones that pay attention to those site changes and ensure protocols are kept up to date for the vendors. But you should be asking yourself, who is that person or entity in your group who's responsible for that? Try to have a central location or database across the portfolio for all of the different types of processes and protocols and updates, so that you can constantly keep new staff in the know ahead of the game. You want a centralized view is the idea of each individual property, which is something that we offer here at Firm for our clients. If you have questions about any of this, by the way, I think Sam may have mentioned this at the beginning, but any questions as we go along, make sure you're dropping them into the Q&A chat, and Trent and I can cover them at the end. I feel like this is maybe a slide where we tend to end up getting the most questions, but yeah, just drop those if you can. So now we're going to go through preventative measures first. If you feel comfortable here and you are maybe multitasking today, I will definitely make it very clear when I move on to the post-catastrophe protocols. But I wanted to start with preventative actions on site. So facilities teams who are the backbone of our initial response. While time is on our side, you want to have your teams conduct roof inspections, clear out storm drains and backup, and gutters, test backup power options, make sure windows are and doors are sealed very well. This should be a part of the regular routine maintenance. And what you can do on the executive side is ask your teams to be honest with you about their schedule. If they don't have the time or staff to get these items completed, you may want to consider budgeting for overtime or whatever is needed to get it done. It is worth it. Don't step over a dollar to pick up a penny. It's so hard to quantify the savings that preventative maintenance gives you, but we all know it's statistically, it saves in the end. And some of these, are that I have on screen are big ticket items, but again, you can check out the free download at the end for a full site team checklist. Is there anything that you wanted to add on that, Trent, in terms of the big ticket items?
Yeah, very well said. Preventative maintenance is one of those really hard topics where it's hard to see the ROI. Sometimes it's oftentimes, seeing the impact of not doing the preventative maintenance and then getting hit with a huge bill. Just in this past week, we've gotten call-ins at firm for a rooftop drain actually got clogged with hail and debris and actually flooded, 20 units in Austin. As I mentioned a little bit earlier, we just had a loss in Indiana because a gutter, downspout was not, draining water properly. And then, of course, the water is going to discharge onto the slab. The slab was not sloped properly, ended up affecting that first floor unit. So over the course of 2 years for that specific one as well. So again, it's one of those things that I know so many people harp on, but it is so important just to get in front of some of those pinch points that will really affect your loss, such as, storm drains and making sure we have backup power and closed windows.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Okay, so defining roles, and this is a bit at the higher level. In a catastrophe, obviously clarity saves time. Defining roles now across departments is important. Who oversees vendors? Who coordinates resident relocation? Who tracks costs? Who updates insurance? All of these things are, when we're onboarding clients, it's often we see a lot of chaos in regards to coordination, teams calling the wrong contacts, vendors waiting on approvals is a big one, just confusion from the risk team, etc. And the bottom line is you want to ensure that the larger team offsite has role definition. And if you do get a heads up, that you ensure that they are all aware of a pending event and are prepared to execute said role. Try to have someone monitoring the different regions of your portfolio for upcoming natural disasters. For our clients, that's us. We have a team of storm trackers and we utilize additional resources to monitor different storm patterns and ensure properties and ops teams are all in the know. But make sure try to stay on top of that. Obviously, anytime you can get a heads up, you want a heads up and you want your whole team to have a heads up for what's coming in. And those things, if you have a large portfolio that's nationwide, it can be very hard to stay on top of those things when you're, I live in Florida. I certainly am aware of some of the natural disasters because they are around me, but there are some that take place on the other side of the country that I don't realize happen until maybe there's news about it the next day after the fact. So for a bit more definition, here are our recommendations. Operations, this is for you regionals, executive ops leaders. Your role is ensuring that the right internal teams are aligned and moving, and that includes confirming vendor authorizations are issued, approvals are escalated quickly, and cross-functional department coordination happens in real time so that the site teams aren't left waiting. That's the big thing. Site teams, you don't want them left waiting and hanging out for different approvals and such. Facilities leads the charge on deploying or coordinating response teams that at the higher level, so across different, especially if you have a lot of sites that are going through the same issues, overseeing the scopes of works and coordinating on-site vendors. I know that it is virtually impossible for one director of facilities to oversee all of this. Again, this is stuff that we have a team of people doing for each of our clients at firm, but Do your best to monitor the vendor pictures and communication that you are getting, and ensure you have the right equipment on site and it's placed correctly for efficiency. We did go over a little bit of that information in a former webinar as well. I know you're not going to have time to get your eyes on all of them, all of the pictures, and sometimes you might struggle with vendors even sending them, but as much as you can, because these items obviously get overlooked by site teams frequently. Facilities should also be empowered to give approvals and prioritize what systems get stabilized first. The risk team should be aligned on when and how to notify insurance, especially with high deductible policies becoming more and more common. Prompt notification paired with good documentation helps preserve your claim. Accounting often gets looped in late, but if possible, they should be tracking costs in real time, tagging them to the correct event period, helping ensure you're not reconciling invoices 3 months after the fact. That is going to help keep your vendors loyal to you and keep your preferred response times in the future. So think about it like that. And at the executive level, it's all about, supporting where the slowdowns are, whether that's reallocating labor, removing red tape, giving the green lights that you need to give. You gotta keep the machine moving. That's your role. Is there anything that you wanted to add here, Trent?
No, very well said, Megan. Just having as much continuity between the different departments is so crucial. We know there's so much chaos. There's so many more complaints. There's so much more resident interface. But again, being able to kind of pull out of that, minutia to make sure each department has their own lane, can trust one another, that each side's taking care of what's being tasked to them is just so crucial. So very well said.
Cool. So this is my letting you guys know we're moving on to the post-catastrophe protocols now. So if you need to reallocate your attention. So the 72-hour rule is on the next couple of slides. I'm going to go over our entire post-event protocols like in depth, but I decided to dedicate an entire slide to the 72-hour rule so that I can really hammer this in. When water affects your building, you have about 72 hours to get drying equipment running before conditions become significantly worse. Water can become a Cat 3 after this time period, and you really don't want that. That time window is a critical insurance threshold. And allow me to harp on this for just a moment for those of you who may be curious of exactly how much cost can get out of control if this rule isn't followed. Once you hit Category 3, as defined by the IICRC, you're looking at paying for full PPE, decontamination, specialized remediation, most of the porous materials are going to need to be torn out and replaced entirely. So drywall, carpet, insulation, mold growth risk obviously is significantly higher. Oftentimes occupants must vacate the space, so you're potentially looking at displacement costs. On the insurance side, with Category 3, insurers scrutinize the scope of work more closely and expect more documentation just to justify the extra costs. Excuse me. We do this every day. Photos, drying logs, material removal logs. Trust me, if you want to avoid getting in depth with those types of things every time you can. Some policies also cap microbial or sewage related losses. Mold endorsements may be limited or excluded entirely if damage escalates. And here's a big one. Delay, of course, equals potential denial risk. If the carrier determines that your delay was caused, like your team calls the delay from a Category 1 to a Category 3, or that escalation rather, then they are more likely to reduce or deny part of the claim. And all of that is not even getting into liability issues, but let us know in the chat if you've got any horror stories that you'd like to share. Trent, do you have anything you want to add here?
No, yeah, very well said, Megan. It is just so crucial. And again, if we can get stabilization equipment, maybe a first pass with an antimicrobial wipe, again, it's going to set us up for success. This is one of those things that after 72 hours, we can't definitively say whether that water is contaminated or not. So the industry best practice is to treat it as contaminated. And it's one of those things that any deviation from what Meagan said, where we're removing, porous materials that were affected, it can only, increase your risk with respect to occupant health and safety. So again, not to, wave that scary, kind of flag in your face, but it's really important just to have, everything in place so that we can get stabilization equipment and then, approach our plan with, prioritizing critical areas, maybe residential spaces, right? Before we work on the lobby, then we can make our decisions and risk calls. But it is so crucial to get at least some DHUs, hopefully some air movement as well, within
Yep.
those first 3 days.
Yep, and that's a big one that's one of the reasons we make sure to guarantee on our end that 2-hour response time so that we get our vendors out there, immediately, and they're taking care of anything that they can take care of, drying in place, etc. So, yeah. So beyond that, post catastrophe, so an event has just occurred. That clock that I was talking about earlier, it's ticking now and fast. Your job is to establish solid communication channels, designate team leads for each area at the same time. Equipment needs to be placed as quickly as possible, especially, like I was just saying, if there's a chance that some materials can be dried in place instead of being removed. Also, be on the lookout for those bottlenecks. There are a lot of moving pieces. A lot of times we see, one team kind of holding things up, and they may need some extra help or guidance just to make sure that there isn't one small team or situation holding up the entire process. And of course, don't forget your insurance notifications. Even if you're working under a high deductible policy, documenting and reporting the situation early protects your financial footing, especially as adjusters may not be able to get on site as quickly anymore. Firm does offer on-site oversight, especially after larger losses, specifically natural disasters most of the time. And our clients have compared Firm to having an insurance adjuster for all events, even non-claimed events. And if you can spare any team members or have somebody like that on your team, you should have someone designated for that. Just try to think about who is protecting you if an insurance adjuster cannot get on site quickly enough or is not on site at all due to any changing trends in coverage. Anything that you wanted to add, Trent?
Yeah, Megan. So I'm glad you brought up the point about being compared to an insurance adjuster. It's definitely one of the things we wear as a badge of honor, not just because we hit a certain deductible and now we get to, get on site. But whereas, adjusters tend to be, experts in the policy, right, which does, of course, impact the restorative, drying efforts. It's also really important, like a group like Firm, some people also refer to us as like building consultants. We're restoration pros. We tend to be looking out for the client property's best interests, especially getting creative with resident strategy and something of the sort. So even if you do have an adjuster on site, you might not be protected in the same way. Now, from your financial and policy risk, of course, but something I'm just really proud of our team that we bring to the table is that kind of creative approach, working outside of the insurance policy. It's like Megan mentioned with recent trends, we're seeing the insurance market really change, especially over the past few years. A lot of folks are having to, manage and pay for losses out of pocket, which is again another, great opportunity that our team can help come in and support.
Yep, absolutely, very well said. So after that first initial response is in having that underway, it's time to shift into sustained recovery mode. The work isn't over, of course, as you may know, in many ways it's just beginning. Track everything from day one. Executive teams should be making sure that everything is being documented in real time. Photos, vendor logs, communication, when key decisions were made. Our are very well trained and know that this can, I do understand that this can be a difficult to get done with certain vendors. do your best. I know that some vendors are more responsible than others when it comes to this kind of thing. But if you wait till after the fact, you lose accuracy and leverage. Don't I wouldn't just, if you're having trouble getting information from your vendors, pictures and logs and stuff from your vendors, then maybe it's time to discuss with someone about a new vendor network. That's something that we see a lot of when we have people get onboarded. They're struggling with having well-trained vendors that are understand their protocols for their company and their site, and that's something that we like to make sure to manage for them. You're going to want to, this data obviously in front of you when insurance negotiations start, or God forbid you end up with any liability issues. You just accurate timestamps, site-specific details, cost justifications are your best protection when you're trying to maximize your recovery or protect your liability. Start evaluating progress daily. What's drawing on schedule? Where is progress stalled? Use those updates to refocus resources, and if needed, give authority to field teams to make faster decisions without going up the chain if you can. Finally, start preparing for your debriefs even as the dust is still settling. What worked? What needs to change? Those insights should be very well documented while they're fresh in your mind so that you can improve performance on the next event. And Trent, I know I say next event, but I know a lot of times you're managing events at the same time for the same, if you have a lot of experience with evaluating and pivoting support, especially for clients with multiple properties impacted by the same catastrophe sometimes.
Yep. Well said. So, and we have a couple recent examples. I mean, Hurricane Ian, Cat 5 that hit Florida, was followed up by Hurricane Nicole a few weeks later. Back a few years ago, there were a couple tropical storms that hit New Orleans back to back. So, as Meagan mentions here, it's really important to have that constant evaluation, but not necessarily be zoned in on the specific community or property. What works well, in Tampa might also be working well in Fort Myers and Orlando, for example. And we don't want to lose any opportunity that could arise from, having too narrow of a focus if the catastrophe is big enough to affect multiple properties.
Yep. Exactly. Okay, we're getting close to the end here. So here's what you walk away with today. 72-hour rule is real. Act fast or pay the price. Pre-disaster agreements secure your response, including with first responders. Clear roles across your team to prevent chaos. Good communication and access planning is going to make all the difference. Your facilities teams can start now with preventative measures. Again, on the very next slide is going to be our site team checklist download. So be sure to get your hands on that. And again, all of this is going to help you reduce insurance claims, get your assets back up in quicker, have a better working relationship with your remediation and restoration partners, and have quicker response times in general. And sticking with these items is a general best practice, should get you started on the road to preventing the worst. But if you are interested in having all of these processes managed for you, Firm is here to help. We're going to be able to assist, negotiate, provide oversight, and even add additional minimalization on some of what that time and those costs could look like. So thank you all for spending time with us today. We know how packed your schedules are, and I know your calendars are quite full. So we really appreciate you making room for this conversation. Hopefully you're walking away with a clear understanding of what needs to happen before and after a disaster, and how quickly things change and can spiral if your team isn't ready. If you want to start taking action now, again, here's our site team prep checklist I've been referencing. You can grab that using the QR code here on your screen, or you can also request it be emailed to you in the chat. Additionally, as another reminder, don't forget to check out our webinars from earlier this year on how to audit invoices and tips on oversight of incidents so you can help lower your vendor bills. And of course, if you want to talk more about firm and how we can support your response protocols, get your vendors aligned, or simplify your documentation, I would love to connect. Now, we would love to hear from you. If you haven't already, you can drop your questions in the chat and we'll tackle as many as we can. Trent and I are here to dig into anything that you're curious about, whether it's that's for 72 hours, vendor prioritization, site team prep, or whatever you've got for us. Throw it in the chat, and Trent is a little bit better on his feet, so might answer most of them, but I'm here to help tackle too. And Sam, you can let us know maybe if we have any chats already.
Great. Yeah. Thank you so much, Megan and Trent. Yeah. So we do have just a few here. So we'll see. We'll see if any more come through. But the first question is, what KPIs or benchmarks should we be tracking during a catastrophic response?
Really like that one. So I can take an approach, and then Megan, I'll let you comment afterwards, because your perspective, being a property manager, right, might look a little different. Me being a, restoration professional and overseer might be a little bit different. So for me, that first kind of KPI I'm looking at, it coincides with that 72-hour rule. How quickly can we get access? Is that same day? Do we have to wait a couple days because of the storm passing through? We have seen that with certain catastrophes, that sometimes access is delayed, which just makes that clock work against us even quicker. So I would say how quickly we can get access. Restoration days to close is another one that we track all the time, as well as cost per area. Our team will even look a little bit closer to look at equipment versus labor versus consumables to see if we did a more dry in place approach, did it support the expected savings on the reconstruction side. So I really like the time for access, the vendor performance KPIs being days to close, cost metrics. And for us, as Megan said too, we know during a catastrophe, it's all hands on deck. You're really focused. We like to take a resident first approach. We love to, really integrate with our clients, mission statements and such. So you might be so focused on getting, Miss Jones back into her apartment, but it's so important on the documentation side. So we also grade our vendors based on the quality and timeliness of documentation. Because as we know, some of those claims, especially a big catastrophe, I'm actually working with a forensic accountant doing some retroactive work still from Hurricane Ian. That was, 2.5 years ago. So it is so important on the documentation side. So those few things jump out to me really quickly. That's a fantastic question. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely a great question. So I was sort of thinking when I heard that, Trent, a lot of what you do when you're monitoring these things is watching drying logs, for example, right? Like you're wanting to make sure that what other types of, apart from like making sure that the moisture is being recovered quickly, like what are the things that you're looking for to make sure that the materials that are on site are doing what they're supposed to be doing, the whatever equipment we've decided to put on site is drying appropriately, fast enough, without being being efficient, without being too much, too big of equipment that you're getting charged for excessively. That
totally right there. Because Megan, like really diving into the psychrometrics is so important. Now, it isn't one of those like perfect KPIs that we're used to seeing. Hey, give me blank and it spits out 16.7 or something like that. But a constant review of the psychrometrics is so important, because like Megan said, too little equipment and we extend the dry time, we're not using the efficient equipment to its full potential. But we do see, and I'm sure a couple of people can relate, if you put too much equipment in, you can actually create a worse issue by creating secondary damage with the excess heat. We've seen people over dry rooms. I actually, saw a vendor last year melt blinds because, the dehumidification equipment got too hot. So again, it's a little less easy to quantify in terms of like a true KPI, but that full psychrometric approach, like Megan said, is something we do hand in hand, and I think is really integral. And that's how we get, really good insight as restoration pros into, which vendors really get it and can get out with a really good response, and which ones are, not as quick to react to the drying progress, right? Because it's not every loss is the same. It's not just, set equipment and go. There's a full science, behind the drying. We're constantly looking at relative humidity, equipment outputs, and so on too. That is so powerful to be able to track, which we, do with our systems. But yeah, very well said, Megan.
Yeah, absolutely. And then in terms of like benchmarks on the, from a property management standpoint, it is going to depend on, each unit that you have, but making sure that you're on track for these different, all of the different teams are on track for resident coordination is going to be a big one, and getting the resident back in the unit as fast as possible if they have had to vacate. So making sure that your teams are coordinating with each other in terms of when the vendor gives a certain date and says that they expect things to be finalized, making sure any rebuild that needs to happen after that is scheduled in advance and ready to go based off of the information that you've gotten from the restoration vendor, and then making sure that the resident is constantly being kept up to date. So making sure you're hitting those key marks to get the resident back in time as quickly as possible, especially if you are living in a state or an area where you have a specific time that you have to get the resident back in.
Yeah, so well said.
Awesome.
Unit downtime and displacement downtime is so important. We love to get a little bit creative with some of that displacement. Like we might prioritize a unit that was fully affected versus a 2-bathroom unit just had 1 bathroom down. We can work around
Right.
that without displacing the resident, for example, but it's a different type of priority and zoned approach if the unit's, closer to a total loss or the whole unit is affected.
Yep.
So great point there, Megan. Yeah.
Anything else,
Awesome.
Sam?
No, thank you. It looks like we have one more, unless something changes, and it's probably a good one to end on. But how does firm prioritize which clients get vendors during a wide-scale event like a hurricane, which, I mean, we've been mentioning this whole time, different very catastrophic events. How does firm get that prioritization?
Absolutely. So it's just it's less of a scale on the prioritization versus me. It's like a yes or no, and it's always yes on the firm team. So what we will do, you know, and especially too, there's certain catastrophes where we have a lot of lead time. I know if there's a hurricane that's trending tracking, you might have a week, and again, the path might deviate. It might go back into the ocean, hit land twice. There's so many different variables, right, Sam? But we look at our account as a whole. So there's not just one client that's, lower on the priority list, but we'll, using hurricane as an example, we'll look at every single firm property that's in the, the cone and then the outer periphery. Make sure then that we're having pre-calls with the vendor partners, doing what we just said. Where are they staging equipment? Which vendors are staging equipment north side of town, south side of town, east side of town, so that we can then, make sure we have the most appropriate response. Some of our site assignments, I don't want to say go out of the window, but we take a different approach during a widespread catastrophe like a hurricane, like the situation in this question. So it's not a matter of going, oh, does firm A client get this and firm B clients go in second. We'll actually look at our full pool of vendor partners, look at where equipment's being staged and where our partners have locations, communities that could be affected, and work the plan that way. In addition to, as Megan mentioned earlier, firm itself has some on-site supports. And we know, during some of those really bad catastrophes, it's all hands on deck. Sometimes we got to get a little creative with access and just complications on the front end. But it's a uniform prioritization for the firm program.
Yep.
For us, it's making sure that we have, excess and contingency plans so that every single community in the cone is protected.
Yes, and so kind of to broadly talk about our process and our approach for that when it comes to vendors, we've got a really great vendor manager on our team that is constantly making new connections with different potential vendors and doing a lot of vetting and a lot of training, and in all the different regions across the United States. We've got a full network. with that a network, the way that we have structured our network and curated our vendors is based off of really well established regional vendors that have a good understanding of what is needed in their area versus the biggest national vendors, because we a lot of times what people are going for when they go after the big national vendors is obviously they want to have coverage across their entire portfolio, which sometimes spans across the entire United States. And the problem with that is that those vendors often are not going to be able to prioritize, certainly not everyone, and they are going to pick and choose who they prioritize. Is some of the things that we have seen in the past. I'm not talking about any specific vendor. I'm not hating on anybody, but we think that our best approach is these regional partners that are very well established and know what they're doing and have been around for a while. They specifically know what they're doing in their region, in their area, depending on the types of incidents that those areas see. But they are you're still getting the nationwide coverage because that's how we have designed our network. Partners who tend to be a lot more dedicated to making sure that their clients are well taken care of, especially ones that are part of a team like firm. So that's just kind of how it gives you a little insight into some of the ways that we've curated our vendor teams, and we have not had any issues whatsoever about us having to decide prioritization between two different firm clients in any specific region or on any event so far. So yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah, just like your financial advisor would say, don't put your eggs all in one basket. We have a really good wide range of agile, hungry, big, small, medium-sized vendors, and that whole portfolio has just been, really good to work with and providing top-notch service to our clients. So very well said there, Megan.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Awesome. Well, thank you again, Trent and Megan, and thank you everyone too for attending today. It looks like you're going to get back about 10 to 15 minutes, so hopefully you have a great rest of your day, and we'll be back and doing another webinar here soon. So thank you and have a great rest of your day.
Thank you all so much. Thanks, Sam and Trent, and thanks to everybody who watched. I look forward to hearing from you if you guys want to talk some more.